Jaycox. I'm Drake Ambrosino. I'm a member of the sales team at New Energy Works, and our topic today is Models First. It's a review of the design and engineering that we dive into on our timber frames. The conversation today is focused on the design approach to your timber frame and how it works in conjunction with the design of your home. When we first meet with you about your project, we need to gather enough information and detail so we can approach the timber frame design accurately. We'll be reviewing a number of topics and answering most of the common questions that arise from our customer meetings. We'll also have some time for question and answer in the question and answer segment at the end of our webinar. You can click on the bottom of your screen. There's a question and answer icon, and you can type in your questions, and hopefully we'll have a chance to get to all of them. In the event we don't, we'll be giving you a phone call probably a little later, and we'll address each of your questions individually. Joining me today for our conversation are two of our key members in our engineering department. Eric Fraser. Eric, can you wave a hand there? Eric Fraser is our head engineer in our Farmington, New York office, and Justin Jaycox is our head sales engineer in our Portland, Oregon office. Both of these gentlemen are highly skilled in their fields, and they display a keen sense of timber design and engineering aspects that are so important to our craft. I'm going to let both of these gentlemen say a few words about themselves, their backgrounds, and their involvement at New Energy Works. Eric, you want to take the lead there?
Sure, Drake. Thanks for the introduction. Happy to meet everyone, even though I can't see you. Been with New Energy Works about 13 years, pretty much fresh out of college. I had a brief stint in the aerospace industry, and then came to New Energy Works, where I started as a project manager and have been involved in design, fabrication, and even some installation on many projects. I was trying to figure out the number the other day, but it's well over a few hundred, and it's been really enjoyable. I think one of the things I love the most is that collaboration with builders and architects and homeowners directly. I mean, we get to see lots of different projects from all over the country, and that's quite enjoyable. So thanks, Drake.
Appreciate it. Justin? Hi, I think you're muted. We can't hear you. Justin, you got to unmute your microphone.
There we go. Thank you. Hi, folks. My name is Justin. I'm a veteran of the Armed Forces. I spent a few years in trades and real estate development. After getting out of the service, I decided to pursue my passion of design, architectural design and engineering. And I've been with New Energy Works now for going on 7 years. I started out east working alongside Eric in our Finger Lakes office, and my family and I decided to get a little change of pace and move out to the Wild West, and I've been a member of our Portland team ever since. And so my current role is helping designers, builders, and homeowners to help realize their visions to designing and budgeting their timber frame project.
Good. Well, and I will say, when we get involved in a project, this is a collaborative effort between primarily the three of us. Justin on the West Coast, Eric on the East Coast. Of course, I'm in Michigan at my home office. And whenever we have projects, we often discuss them as a team. Another set of eyes and ears to take a look at the project and analyze what's going on, and probably come up with the best solutions for the homeowner and the engineering and the combination of that. So it's a delightful and enjoyable association that I have with these two gentlemen. They do a great job, and for the most part, we get along pretty well. So it's fun. We're going to start our conversation today around construction drawings. That's usually where we begin to design a timber frame. We need a set of drawings. So I'm going to ask Eric to handle this. The question might be, what type and quality of construction drawings do we normally look for and work with?
Yeah, good question. Good way to start. Yeah, I think we tend to see a lot of different project types. Everything from small front porch entries to grand horse barns and riding arenas, and as residential houses. So we're big believers in the architectural design process, in kind of taking that process as the start for our work. So that process can be with our own internal design team, or in many cases that Justin and I collaborate on often is with independent architects. And being kind of heavy timber specialist, our job is to get in, integrate, and work with those folks on the timber specific component that we're involved in. And so we tend to see all sorts of different design. The most important piece to us is trying to establish or find a conveyance of design intent. So, when we look at that set of plans, can we clearly see what the architect or design professional is trying to communicate about their vision for the project? And that's really the springboard for us. We take that and we kind of try to develop our piece further so that we can enhance that vision. In many ways, we're not looking for 100% construction documents or structural documents. And it's almost better to not have that, because we want to get in, we want to try to integrate our work with that set of plans so that we've kind of got this comprehensive piece jiving back and forth with the rest of the architectural design. So I think to circle back, the level of plan isn't as critical as the design intent that's being set forth. And so we try to echo that vision and have our work respond to the work of the architect or design professional.
Good answer, and I think that was comprehensive. What's interesting is I often get from some of the folks that I meet at our shows a really basic sketch of what they might be interested in. And there are times when that may be all we have to work with. We try to take it further. We try to find design sources that apply to that project, and then, of course, develop the timber frame. We prefer to have drawings that have a little bit more meat to them and that are a little bit more well thought out. So that's a good answer, Eric. I appreciate that. When a client brings us a set of plans from another source, let's say they've found something on the internet or a plan book, or maybe they've gone to another architect that doesn't show a timber frame. In other words, it's a generic set of plans. How do we go about getting the frame identified and figuring out where it all, where it fits that house? Justin, you might want to tackle that one.
Yeah, that's a great question, Drake, because we do deal with that quite a bit, especially out here in the West. And I'd like to show an example of that linear process of getting a set of plans without timber frame and kind of how we incorporate our system. So this was a drawing set that I actually met these folks at a local home show, and they were excited when they saw us because they'd been following us through Timber Home Living. They were, signed up for our postcard of the day, so they were familiar with us. And they were close to retiring and wanting to build that forever home. So this plan that they found online really kind of fit that lifestyle, fit their, fit the bill. But they were, their dream was to incorporate, timber frame into this home somehow. So we started talking about, hybridization. They started sharing existing site photos along with a gallery of, timber frame design inspiration that they had put together through both, their house and their Pinterest accounts. And the one consistent design element that I kept seeing was soaring vaulted ceilings filled with curved timber trusses. So one of the things that they wanted to kind of add to the design is they had a panoramic view of the Cascade Mountain range. So they wanted to, enhance that view by bringing this great room wall back to the dining room and kind of expanding that porch to give them an outdoor space for both entertaining or have that morning cup of coffee. So what we did is we started by designing, just kind of putting a three-dimensional model together of the enclosure, just to kind of give us an understanding of both the timber frame and the enclosure and how it all interacts together. Then we started to focus clearly on the region where we wanted to focus the timber. So we had a couple of rounds back and forth of just a design charrette, basically, where we took those inspirational images, we took those conversations and tried to develop something that really fit their needs, fit their budget, and it developed into this indoor outdoor space where they could expand that living area and give them a spot to entertain in the summertime, and just have that overall feeling of volume and space, which is what they were looking for.
The rear porch design follows the interior design in this case, Justin?
Correct. So we wanted to give the feel of these rhythmic trusses that continue from the interior and kind of give it the visual of going through the wall, even though we're not breaking that, we're not penetrating through that thermal envelope, but just continuing the theme of timber from the interior to the exterior.
Mm-hmm. So this brings me to my next question. The generic question is, who designs my frame and how do we choose the style of the truss? So you've done this, what you've just shown us, you've done this in collaboration with the client first?
Exactly.
And how that happens?
Because I think the client really has the vision for what they want. It's just a matter of extracting that information and visually putting it on paper so that they can see it three-dimensionally and being able to spin it around and show them the timber frame that's really inside their mind.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So once that frame is modeled, as in the example that you showed us here, how do we go about narrowing in on the specifications and then eventually the pricing of that and the other components that we sell? We sell structural insulated panels. We have tongue and groove materials for the ceiling detail. We have Marvin doors and windows. So we have a host of products. How do we kind of zero in on that so that they have something to understand as far as budget might go?
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I think that's a great question, Drake. I mean, once we're to the point of estimating a project, similar to what Justin's created, I mean, we've probably spent a fair amount of time getting to know the client and the project. Yeah, we certainly understand the design intent. We hopefully understand a little bit about the site and logistics. And so we take all of that information and we try to put our best recommendation for things like materials, texture, joinery, species, and structural detailing. So all these things can really impact the overall budget of a project. For instance, if somebody comes to us and says, "Oh, geez, we really want reclaimed white oak versus a kiln-dried Douglas fir," I mean, those are two very different decisions that will greatly impact the overall budget and project. So we try to discuss that. We try to understand what they're asking for and how those decisions impact their overall project. Most typically, we're working with Douglas fir, whether it be kiln-dried. We like it for a variety of reasons. It's large cross-section, good structural properties, relatively easy to use for a timber frame species. That said, we've worked with oak, we've worked with cedar, we've worked with hemlock, and we really like to use reclaimed wood whenever possible. Our sister company is Pioneer Millworks, one of the leaders in the salvage wood industry, and anytime we can collaborate with Pioneer, it's kind of a win-win. Give timbers a whole new life, repurpose, and on top of the inherent dryness and stability that comes with reclaimed timbers, you always got a great story to tell and some great character with it. So materials are a big part of that conversation. We also, again, understanding the design intent, we'll really try to focus on finishes. 15 years ago, it was a lot of just kind of naturally oiled Douglas fir or other species. And today, I mean, we've really invested in different techniques, coloring, texturing. Really, our goal is to hit that vision, whether it's a client, an architect, or any other design professional. We try to draw that out through the modeling process, through the design process. We try to integrate that with the other scope of the work, and then we really try to execute it. And so all those parts and pieces that go along with executing are the parts and pieces that drive the budget. And so when we're putting that together, we look at all those parts and pieces, but also we really try to focus on the site conditions and the logistics involved with the actual installation. So we raise our own frames every single time. We're big believers in that for a lot of reasons, but most importantly, it's a way for us to control quality. So once we've made the decisions on materials, finish, structural, we know those parts and pieces. We really start to focus in on the logistics. What's it going to take to get it there? Where's our crew going to stay? How far away are they? What's the integration with the local builder and the site? And so we take all those things and we really try to package them up into one comprehensive proposal where there's some options, but really trying to nail that right from the start.
Right. I might point out that the timber frame behind you, you're in the office in New York, the timber frame behind you is oiled Douglas fir.
That's correct. Yep, you got it.
Folks. Okay. You've touched on something that I think is important here. After we've got the modeling that Justin demonstrated, and we work out the specifications, the species, the finishes, and so forth, that usually ends up in a formal printed proposal.
Yep.
It has a lot of specifications in it, and it has accurate pricing. So I'd like you to touch on that as well. Talk about the pricing and why we spend the time, as much time as we do, to prepare that document.
Yeah, good question. So the pricing that we provide, you know, when we're trying to provide a budget price or depending on how far along the process we are, we're trying to provide fixed fee numbers that a client can count on. So if tomorrow say, yep, the design is good, yep, the member size is good, structurally it works, yada yada, we're happy, that's a fixed fee proposal that they can act on and put it within the rest of the budget of the project and understand those costs. So that's part of the reason we spend so much time up front really trying to develop and understand the way that the timber frame will integrate with the rest of the house, and we can try to predict some of those other parts and pieces of the project. That said, I mean, if we're working at a really early on schematic design or design development stage, and the rest of the house isn't quite as far along design, then we'll probably suggest that our budget responds to the status of the design at that point. But if we're proposing a project that is pretty much a completed construction documents, and we've gone through that process of timber design and integration, we're really confident in our numbers, and we set those up as fixed fee, firm pricing.
Okay. And when the pricing is detailed in that proposal, how long is that a valid price typically?
Yeah.
I mean, everything in the building industry goes up with time. So if somebody is working on their budget and trying to develop that, and they still have homework to do regarding the rest of the building, how long is our pricing valid?
So the nomenclature in our proposals at the end say that our numbers are good for 30 days, and that's mostly due to the volatile nature of timber pricing. For the most part, it's stable, but we do see from time to time there are spikes in pricing. So if it's been a few months and the project's continuing to develop, we simply send out your timber list for revised pricing, and we adjust your proposal from there. Or if you're ready to go to, ready to start moving forward into the contract phase, then yeah, it's pretty typical process for us.
Okay.
I'll just chime in on that, Drake, a little bit too. I think timber pricing does fluctuate a little bit, but it's not like specific lumber pricing. We don't get the more rapid changes. So we do say 30 days, but we tend to, we're trying to build a relationship through this pricing exercise. And so we try to monitor that very carefully. Now, certainly if there are big spikes, then we do adjust for that. But most typically we're able to kind of suss that out along the way. And if we see it coming, we tend to bring it up and talk through that.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me. The modeling and then the pricing process that a client will see, how long does that typically take?
It's a great question. And to really touch on Eric's point, we like to say it takes roughly 2 weeks for us to fully wrap our arms around your project. And that lead time depends on a few things. How much information is being sent to us? How much, is it a comprehensive set of construction documents, or is it more of a design development set? How conceptual is the design? Is there a timber frame involved? Sometimes if there's not a timber frame, there's a couple rounds of back and forth of visually communicating our design intent, showing 3D models, 3D imagery to convey the scope that we're presenting before we start formalizing your pricing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can say this. I mentioned earlier the collaborative effort that the three of us often have on a project.
Mm-hmm.
Sales guy, I always look for this information tomorrow. I'm always have it, and it drags on sometimes with Justin and with Eric for good reason. I will say this: when we supply a proposal, we've gone through the engineering, the sizing of the material is accurate, we understand where it's being built, and the building conditions all around the country, because we build in every state. The pricing is accurate. It may not be exactly what the client finally buys, but it is accurate. And that's the most important thing. I've seen so many other companies do sort of a thumbnail price on something, and when it's time to purchase, there are all sorts of surprises, and we don't run our business that way. So when we're in that modeling and pricing phase, whatever that is and however long it takes, I say it's time well spent. Although I'll continue to push and try to get my proposals out as fast as we can.
Oh, we know you will, Drake.
Always the.
I mean, part of going back to the duration of the process, I mean, part of the reason that it is a process is because we really do try to understand both what our scope is within that process and within that project, but also really the scope around us and the scopes that we impact. So just thinking about the project Justin showed up on a screen, there's 15 different ways to build around our scope, and the architect may have a vision, and the client may have a vision, and the builder may have a vision. So us trying to understand what's the most efficient way and the most effective way to deliver our projects within those other envelopes is important, and it takes time, and there's a lot to be learned and gained just through the timber design and process in that integration. And the other thing I just want to touch on, a lot of times what we'll often do, and I think this strategy is important as well, is we'll just push that design back without pricing. I mean, again, we want to execute the design intent and the vision. We don't necessarily want to work to hit the budget first. We want to work to hit the design intent and the vision first. So a lot of what we'll do is we'll do the work, we'll do the modeling, we'll try to get in, and we'll try to say, hey, is this what you were thinking? Is this along the lines? And oh, by the way, we think X, Y, and Z should also happen, whether those are aesthetic reasons, whether those are structural reasons or constructability reasons. We tend to give our opinions and really try to promote what we think is both a beautiful but long-lasting and efficient project as well in timber frame design. So it does take a little longer, Drake, but I think it's with good reason.
And I would agree. And the results are obvious by the great buildings that we build.
Yeah.
All right. So let's assume for a moment that a client has gone through the modeling and we've tweaked it a few times to make sure that it's what the design intent, as you refer to it, and we've gone through the proposal and we have pricing that is acceptable. What happens after that? How do they get a frame on their site?
Yeah, yeah, you start hurrying because usually, so we try to get in a sequence and a rhythm. But as soon as we get to the point where we're agreed on a price, we're agreed on a scope and a specification, we quickly move to a formal contract, which pretty much mirrors our proposal. But after that, we assign a project engineer to really take that design and continue to refine it. So things like joinery, a really formal engineering process happens where we check every member size. We're designing joinery based on truss loads, and really getting into the nitty-gritty details of how everything goes together. So in the sales process, Justin and I may look at the overall composition of the house, and we tend to make some assumptions about structure and how things work. But when it gets to project engineering and our engineering team, they really study it, from everything to what's the finished floor thickness to every single datum, plate height, window height around that building, because we're bringing a prefabricated, highly precision crafted piece of furniture to your site and setting it up on site and having to make sure that everything else built around it fits the composition that the architect and builder and homeowner are expecting. So we really get into those details. Shop drawings are critical to us, where we think about lighting, finishes, floor finishes, really everything that is touching that timber frame, we're thinking about and coordinating on. So Justin and I are usually still involved in that process, but we assign it to a project engineer who takes the lead and really takes it home, and lots of further modeling and further discussion with that process.
Yeah, this is where good construction drawings and good shop drawings marry each other, and accurate. We have accurate measurements, and we've solved any problems on paper first before we get to the job site.
Yeah.
I will say our raisings are smooth, are short of maybe bad weather, or they're right on time, and it's because we've taken the time to do not only the drawing work but the shop work very carefully.
Yeah.
And when things go up on site, it's a dance. It's a wonderful event.
It absolutely is. It's a beautiful event. It takes a lot of pre-coordination on detailing, and that's not just us. That's about the builder on site, the clients on site, really taking care to prep the project site as we all kind of expect. I mean, the bad days are always when you head up to a site, and this doesn't happen hardly ever, but then you find out that there's a problem with the foundation or the deck framing, and that's where you have to kind of problem solve on your feet. And it happens, but boy, not too often, because we are really focused on the details right through the project so that we can bring this together as an integrated and graceful effort.
Let me ask another question. We use traditional mortise and tenon joinery, but we do some special things that are involved in that were a little different than some of the other timber frame companies. Do we have any examples that we can show, and can you explain our joinery and what makes it unique and good?
Yeah, I don't have any specific examples, but Justin may. I think for us, one of the things that we really try to focus on and care about a lot is the overall aesthetics and performance of the timber frame over time. So what does timber frame, what does performance mean over time? It has a lot to do with the movement of the timber as it shrinks and twists and checks a little bit, because the timber is a natural element. It has some bound moisture, and it is going to move around a little bit, much like a log cabin over time. So when we're designing joinery, we're trying to be really thoughtful about that. And one of the things that we'll do is we try to house members and create. Justin, do you have an example of what
I'm looking for one right now, Eric.
So we try to create housing so that members are contained or restrained from that shrinking and twisting as much as possible. That's a big one. We're also focusing just in our pure joinery design, obviously on the structural connections. There's a little bit of a misconception about, steel plates, and they make it cheaper and easier. And the reality is, for a timber frame company, you really just want to cut mortise and tenon joinery whenever possible. So, through that initial design process and understanding what the project goals are, we really look at that, really look at those components and try to advise and make decisions on how we think things should go together. But most typically we're focusing on mortise and tenon joinery where possible. Most trusses will have an embedded steel connection at the tension points, just so that we can get the composition to work. But other than that, we try to keep as much wood to wood joinery as we can.
Justin, do you have an example of that? Any images?
I've been looking, Drake. I can't seem to find one offhand that shows a really good mortise and tenon house joint.
Well, maybe we can supply those later when people.
Yeah.
Sure.
By the way, folks, question and answer time is still available. We're a little ahead of our schedule, so if you've got questions, hit that tab at the bottom and type them in, and we're glad to address those. I'd like to ask the question about, and I often get this question at the shows, of structural or non-structural, let's call it faux, frames. What's the difference? How do they perform? We typically think that structural is the way we build. So if somebody can address that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one we get quite often, and we refer to them as timber frames sometimes, versus a structural timber frame. And so, certainly both have their place. We do prefer structural timber whenever possible. There's lots of reasons for this, but essentially, in almost every case, we're able to take this heavy timber element that is purposeful, it has mass, it has structural properties, and almost every time it's already designed as a truss. Integrate that within the building envelope and have it do work. So have it support the roof loads, have it do its job that it's been visually designed to do anyway. So the applications where we are asked for timbers to be non-structural we tend to try to have them be structural because it really changes the installation sequence and the overall finish level. So if we're looking at a non-structural timber frame, what really you're asking New Energy Works or a similar company to do is to take this really highly crafted finished piece and install it up into the envelope from below, and it might weigh 1,500 pounds, and you may want it scribed to the drywall ceiling and walls framed on both sides. It's a really tricky and challenging endeavor versus having this element that's already there, already designed to be structural, setting it up at the right time with the crane, and then being able to frame around it right to where you want your finishes. So we tend to advocate for fully structural timber frames where we can. It doesn't work on every project, and there are reasons why it may not work on some projects. But in general, that's certainly the preference. We have mass, we have wood, it has the ability to perform and do a job, and so we should let it do its job. The other follow-up question that we often get with the timber question is, well, if you just box out a beam and make it hollow, it's effectively lighter and easier to install. And yes, that's true, but the follow-up to that is, well, now we're taking a timber that is natural, it's grown, it's a element, and it's got beauty, and we're cutting it apart and trying to rebuild it and make it look like that versus just installing it the way it's intended and let it do the work and do its job. So our preference whenever possible is to try to integrate and coordinate so that we're installing timber frames as structural components. But there's certainly the rare instance where you can't, and therefore it becomes a timber or non-structural element.
I will say, I can't think of any projects that we've tackled that we haven't been able to solve not only the aesthetics of our frames, but the structure of our frames. And that, again, I'll lean on the expertise of these engineers and the staff behind them. Once we understand what the building is supposed to do in the construction method, so far I haven't seen anything we haven't been able to solve. And I think that's a compliment to the company. Smart,
Yeah.
lots of talent, and lots of depth of good resources within New Energy Works and our sister company. And we tap it quite often.
Yeah, I think it also goes straight to the early integration of our work or timber engineer or timber professionals' work with the architectural design process. So, through quick early studies, early conceptual models, because usually there's a reason why somebody say, well, let's make it timber, and then so you have to kind of chop that back and understand why are we going down this path. And the earlier you can do that, the more successful you are, or we may be into having that structural timber frame be the outcome or the desired solution. We found this really tough to change 100% construction documents when they're 100% construction documents. Architects are usually done with their work, or design professionals, and it's harder to change. But when they're in the design development or schematic design, you can be really impactful with the integration of this kind of specialty design piece. So,
okay. I have one more question to ask in regard to the design of the frames. And then we do have a couple of questions from our participants, so bear with me. The last question that I have is the concept of putting a loft inside your great room and what impact that has, what are the benefits and maybe the drawbacks. Justin, you do a lot of my type of design work and center core timber frame through the house. It's often tall enough to do a loft, but I don't always suggest it. Can you address that a little bit for us?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. You've got these taller voluminous spaces that kind of lend themselves to that loft space. And it's simple to add the timber frame and be that loft floor structure. And, at that point, it's an option to add a conventional floor system through there, or just put in your decking and your finished flooring. But some of the challenges that we find with lofts are both, acoustic and heating and cooling challenges. One is, running your systems and having that space above and being able to heat and cool it effectively. And the other one being, acoustic settings. But I think the big one is when you're adding a loft system to a timber frame, one of the things that needs to be accounted for is the stair system. Because now you've got added square footage, and a stair system, especially a decorative stair system, costs, it does have added cost to it. That being said, it's simple for us to incorporate maybe a timber frame stair system into the design. And I can actually show you an example here. So this particular project, they had a loft, kind of lent itself to adding though it's a closed stair system, we were able to continue the theme of timber through the transition from the first to the second floor.
Those are heavy timber treads.
Heavy timber treads.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I find that when a loft is desired and they are of the size that makes them usable, it ridge height of the great room taller, of course. You have to have enough loft so that it's usable. That sometimes detracts from the coziness. And I just had a client make a comment that he wished his trusses were a little bit lower so he could enjoy the beauty of them more closely. So I thought that was an interesting observation. So it's it's sort of a double-edged sword there of adding the space, but losing some of that coziness. One of the questions that came up with our participants is about site visits and how the design of how the information that we gather on a site transpires to the building design and the timber frame design.
Yes, it's a good question.
We addressed this in our last seminar, but it's a good point about site visits.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. We like to let, from a design perspective, I mean, we really focus on lots of things. One is, how you're going to interact in your home or structure, or the purpose or the intent for the building. But then also, just as important is, where is the site? How does the site respond, or how does the building respond to the site? And so any real good design process should have a very specific site component integrated or embedded within. And my colleagues Ty and David and Drake did a webinar, I think about 2 weeks ago, really talking about that in more detail and in the importance of that. From the timber frame perspective, we certainly want to know what the site's like from the logistics, the access, but really at that point, we're following an architectural design from an architect or another design professional. So we're more responding to what they're developing for that site. But yeah, the site is super critical. It does drive limitations in some cases, but also creates opportunities in others. So
right.
Good question.
There are two questions, and they're sort of tied together. The question is, how do we integrate a timber frame with stick-built construction? And another question, what's a hybrid? They're tied together.
Yeah.
Justin, you want to tackle that?
Sure. Yeah, kind of like the example that I showed is incorporating timber frame, using our standards, and incorporating timber frame into a stick-built structure and celebrating that timber frame, making it structural, and looking for, this upfront service of looking for potential interferences and making sure that we understand all the load paths and, from the roof all the way down so that we can account for that when we're both designing and doing a preliminary engineering analysis on the timber frame.
Okay, all right. Another question is about oiled Douglas fir and other species, of course, and how we detail the edge treatments, our carvings, the finishes, perhaps. You might want to touch on that just a little bit. Eric, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, when I started 13 years ago, I think we would offer pretty typically Douglas fir, and we would either do a chamfered edge, which is an edge cut at a 45-degree angle, a radiused edge, or an eased edge, which is just like a lightly broken kind of sanded edge. Now today we've really tried to further our knowledge into finishing, and with finishing comes texturing, because they kind of work hand in hand. Some specific finishes require different textures and treatments, and so from an edge detail standpoint, we're open and creative. I mean, we try to be as creative and as custom as our clients push us to be and ask us to be. So whether it's chamfers, it's eased edges, it's radiuses, it's as hand drawn edges. Yeah, Justin's pulling up just some examples. What you're seeing on this first image is was a clear finished eased edge Douglas fir timber frame. These are all Douglas fir. The next is more of a heavy wire brush with a brown stain. Again, you can see how the brushing changes the grain of the wood and allows different colors to come through and finishes to come through. And one of the things we've done a lot and played around with quite a bit is burning in combination with hewing. So again, we're just trying to take a material that we enjoy working with. We think it's good from for a structural base, but also we know we can get it dry, which is really, really important to us. And so we're trying to use that material to our advantage, but also still hit the specific vision and design intent of the project. So in this case, it's a deep brown with a hue. It is, again, brown with a burn. So really kind of unlimited options. I say that knowing that there are some limitations. We'll always try to match a specific vision or design intent for
Yeah.
sure. That's the enjoyable part.
Yeah.
I mean, if we were always building the same oiled Douglas fir frame, thankful and happy to do that. But we really love the idea of something new, something different, and creating within that boundary.
Right. And those images that Justin just showed also showed contrasting tongue and groove colors.
Yep.
So that's a popular notion. Like the timbers behind you are the same colors. They're same.
Yeah.
Images that Justin just provided, there were some contrasting colors. So I often say we're artists first.
Yeah.
To try to accentuate the art of the frame, the gracefulness of the frame, and the colors and the textures. So lots of versatility. Another question is about our use of fresh sawn green timber or reclaimed or kiln dried timbers. We have quite a variety in those specifications. Some of the things that we've detailed in those proposals. I don't know if either one of you want to address some of the benefits or how we use those.
Yeah, it's a great question. We could spend an hour probably just talking about that. I think each of them have their place in a project. There's definitely different cost considerations with each of them. The one thing to know, and is really critical when thinking about a timber frame, is the moisture content within the timber itself. So a fresh sawn, what we call fresh sawn box tart timber, was functionally a tree in the woods yesterday, and is a timber, today, on a set of sawhorses being cut is part of the house. So that timber has a pretty high moisture content. So over time, as that timber dries out, it's going to check, it's going to shrink, and it's going to twist a little bit. And so the impacts to the project won't be structural impacts, in that you have to be concerned that there's a structural problem, but there is some aesthetic changes that happen with that timber that will resolve itself in the joinery. And so for us, when we're looking at a project, we almost always like to start with a kind of a free of heart kiln dried Douglas fir is the base for almost any interior project. I mean, I think it's a really good value for the cost, and it has a lot more stability in that wood fiber than a fresh sawn box tart timber may. So if it's barn or if it's this kind of really rusticy lodge, and we're going to celebrate the fact that as timbers dry out, they move, they check, they twist, they shrink a little bit, then we can have the discussion about fresh sawn wood. But for most residential interior applications, we tend to start with kiln dried free of heart, and not to suggest it won't check, but it's quite a bit, it's minimized quite a bit from
More stable.
on box tart. And then from there are other options about radio frequency drying and reclaimed, which are taking similar fiber, but it's even a higher dryness level. So
Right.
you can create with Douglas fir and some other species too, we can create really good stability within the timber by drying it or having it dried prior to fabrication.
Okay. In relation to in response to the images that Justin showed of the house, and we went through the model, a question has come up about the difference in either species or finishes on the exterior and the interior. What's the difference when something's on the exterior of the building?
Justin, you want to take it, or?
Sure. But typically what we see is, like Eric mentioned, we want to go with something a little bit more dry, more stable on the interior, but on the exterior, we would start with a kiln dried timbers, but we could also explore the option of going with a fresh sawn timber as well, because it's a different, it's a different environment on the exterior. So we could do something that's got a little bit more, a little more moisture content in it, because it's going to receive more moisture being out, being exposed to the elements.
We also use different oils for the finishes. Product,
Right. Yeah.
mentioned that the ultraviolet.
Right. Yeah. Typically, we go with something that's got a little bit more UV protectant for the exterior as opposed to the interior.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the stains that we showed have multi-step, semi-transparent stains in there. So, you're talking about a pretty long duration of UV protection against fading and things like that.
Mm-hmm. One more question
Go
about.
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
As I say, the one thing I think I would say with exteriors is that clears, naturals and clears are really tough outside. I mean, they're beautiful. They look really well, but the sun will eventually eat that away. So that can be the one area that we looked at to maybe add a little bit more pigment, which will add a little bit more protection and just allow that finish to last a little bit longer.
Mm.
We have one question about rough sawn timbers and some of those textures. One of my favorites, of course, is a hand-hewn frame. It does cost more because it's done by hand, but let's talk about the different surfaces on timbers and the range of opportunities there.
Yeah, I think from a surface treatment, there are a couple. So surface four sides is pretty typical. It's a planed, smooth timber on all faces, usually with a light edge detail. From there, the next step is a rough sawn timber. So a timber that still has kind of a rough sawn, band sawing type texture, right from the mill as it was processed. And we do quite a bit of that where we'll leave that texture right in place, or in some instances reapply it. But again, that's just a different look. It's a little bit different feel than a smooth surface four sides timber. Another option is Justin's got up is a wire brushed timber. So similar to the rough sawn, which is more cross grain, a wire brush is more creating a little bit of depth within that texture, but going with the grain. So kind of scrapes out some of the early late wood along the direction of the grain, whereas rough sawn is across the grain texturing. So you see that, and then the last one, or sample 4, I think, Justin, that you had up was or 3, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
was a hand-hewn project drake that you recommended. There's a lot of labor there, certainly. I mean, the only way to really replicate a hewn timber is to hew a timber, which is the process of taking an adze and swinging it all day long, which is shown here. So it's a pretty interesting process. The last guy that shows up to work that day gets to do the hewing. So we're all here bright and early, and a little bit of a draw straws game, but yeah, all great options. Of course, the last thing, which is relatively new to us in the last maybe 6 or 7 years, is this idea of shoshugiban, or burning timbers, which really have allowed us to do some interesting things with color composition and additional texturing and finishing. So
That's also popular in our sister company, Pioneer Millworks. They do a lot of that burned wood, and then multiple colors, actually quite a wide range of colors that are very interesting that can be used for flooring and siding and accent pieces.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're probably near the end of our hour projection here, and if there's any other major questions or comments, we're glad to handle them. I want to thank everybody for coming on board and viewing this webinar. We'll have another one in, I believe, 2 more weeks, and our marketing department will keep you informed about times and dates and topics. I encourage all of you, if you have additional questions or just want general information about our craft and about the building industry, don't hesitate to call us. We're glad to help. We're glad to answer the emails and phone calls. We'll send examples of work that we've done. We'll get on our website and show you examples of all the questions and features. There's a wealth of knowledge in our website and in the work that all of our folks do at our two shops. So don't hesitate to tap those resources. And we'd be proud to be part of your project. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate you guys a little later. And thank you all for visiting. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Drake. Bye, Eric.